Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, I believe you have not had electricity since Wednesday or something.
Yes, that's it. It's the. I think our CEO John Andrews said it. When you hear the generators and don't see any lights, the rhythms of a slowly failing state. It's all quite nice. But I've been assured we'll get electricity back on Monday, which is quite nice. So only about 5 days in the electricity, which is okay. So he just offers charging my little lights. I can read at least a bit later.
Okay, well, good to have you with us. And we're also joined by Mr. Michael Morris. Michael, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very glad to say that I don't have the power problems that Marius has. And it kind of brings home to you, I was thinking to myself, if we're facing a weekend without electricity in this suburb, there'd be, possibly riots in the street. 3 people might be throwing lemons at passing municipal trucks or something like that. But what, it just brings home to you that when things are really bad, you actually just have to adjust to them. You do. And it's quite horrific, actually. The prospect of facing a whole weekend without electricity. All strength, Marius. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Well, my house had close to a week without electricity, but it was luckily while I was house sitting for someone else, so I didn't have to endure it. Thank goodness. But with that sort of setting the scene of, I think, where we are as a country, let's talk a little bit about the most interesting political development of the week. And this is the formation of the multi-party charter for South Africa, which is, I'm just going to say, not the most exciting name in the world, but this is the one they agreed upon rather than Moonshot Pact or Rainbow Coalition or Wild Dogs or whatever the alternatives were. It consists of the Democratic Alliance, the IFP, the Freedom Front Plus, Action SA, the United Independent Movement, a Spectrum National Party, the Independent South African National Civic Organization. And the idea behind this thing is to create basically a framework for coalitions going into 2024. So this will be the core of an anti-ANC coalition if it gets enough votes. So I'm just going to read little bits from this charter. There's kind of some interesting things in here. The signatory political parties to this agreement will contest elections as individual political parties that will present their unique offerings to the South African people. It is acknowledged that while the signatory political parties form part of this multi-party charter for South Africa, each party is an autonomous decision-making entity. They listed their priorities for government. They say growing the economy and creating jobs, ending load shedding, achieving law and order, ensuring quality education, delivering basic services through high-quality infrastructure, building a professional civil service that delivers to all and ends catered employment, ensuring quality healthcare for all within a caring healthcare system, building a social relief framework for South African households living in poverty. They listed some shared governing principles. They said the South African Constitution, the rule of law and equality before the law. This is quite an interesting one. Decentralizing power to the lowest effective level of government. Accountable, transparent government with zero tolerance for corruption. Capable government that spends public money efficiently to develop quality services for all. An open market economy. Caring government. Policies guided by evidence that they produce results for society. I always think that those ones are like a nice idea. An idea like that is nice when you hear it, but actually in reality, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Redress our unjust past by promoting non-racialism and unity in our diversity. They say, therefore, we will not entertain any working arrangement or co-governing agreements with the ANC, EFF, or any rival formations, and we will not vote for any office bearers of the ANC and EFF nominated either directly or indirectly at any inaugural meetings of the National Assembly, National Council, provinces, and provincial legislatures. So this is not just a coalition framework for the national government, it also applies to the provinces. Our mission is to unseat the ANC, keep out the EFF, usher in a multi-party government following the 2024 national and provincial elections. They talk about some principles of sharing public power. Coalitions cannot be stable if power sharing is purely dealt with on a level of dividing up positions between coalition partners. Long-term coalition stability can only arise where power sharing transcends the superficiality of a focus on positions and achieves the principle of co-governance, a system of coalition which results in a genuinely multilateral program of government. So they've come up with this system where everyone will like make they'll make a collective manifesto which will have input from every political party involved in this multi-party coalition. They'll revise the National Development Plan, which is supposed to be the government's kind of plan for how to develop the country, and translate this into a 5-year term of office national provincial plan, annual budgets, and departmental plans. There'll be a system of monitoring and evaluation framework which will be developed to ensure key performance areas are identified. There is no requirement that the leader of the largest party is de facto to be nominated for the position of president. So this suggests that the DA is willing to hold back on chasing after the presidency, regardless of whether they're the biggest party or not. However, it does say the largest party in a coalition in the National Assembly that arises from this agreement and that does not hold the position of president of the republic will hold the position of leader of government business. Is usually the deputy president. So basically, the DA is conceding here that if they don't get the presidency, if the coalition doesn't want to have the presidency, they will at least get the deputy presidency and maintain the an enhanced role, so like a powerful deputy president. They basically then say, this thing can only be dissolved by consensus decision of the other signatory parties. Okay, so a lot to talk about there. Another interesting thing that we can talk about is that they asked for submissions about policy, and the IRR did submit some policy ideas, which we talk about regularly on the show, what kind of ideas we're interested in here. So, Michael, what do you make of this? I mean, I think that this is a pretty solid framework for the complex thing that they're trying to do, right? Which is to hold together a government which would be consisting of a lot of different political parties which have, in some cases, quite big disagreements with each other, particularly not just on policy, but especially on personality lines. However, there's a couple of like signatories here, like the Spectrum National Party, Independent South African National Civic Organization. I don't think they have any seats. What do you say? They certainly don't have any seats in Parliament. And the question kind of needs to be asked, is this going to make is this going to make the distance? What do you make of this?
I think a number of important points to be made and important points that you've raised. I think the first thing is, we're not looking for nirvana. We're not going to have a solution delivered, signed and sealed and packaged neatly. But I think this is, personally, a remarkably good start. I think it's a very good sign that they managed to sit down for 2 days. They managed to work out a kind of joint program of action here, more or less in principle. We hear words like effective, capable, and I'm just kind of looking at some of the comments. Dirk van Niekerk talking about the tentacles of ANC patronage, Moonchild talking about the real problem is we've got to get together and kind of work on a solution and resist all the rubbish. Lazarly is talking about specifics. Where's the plan? I think we're seeing the sort of basis of this in what seems to be a pretty level-headed, measured approach to really finding a solution. I certainly do think that one has a sense of these parties recognizing that there's something greater than positions and power and all the trappings that come with political life, or potentially, and that's a good sign. It's now up to us, really, I suppose, to hold these parties to account. And pay attention to them. I think it's important for us, for South Africans, to pay attention to this formation. Somebody made an amusing comment earlier. Malema must be jealous with all the attention that this coalition is getting, but it's showing actually that there's something really worth paying attention to. This is what's been happening this week. We're going to go on and talk a little bit about the IRR's contribution, but as a general comment, I think it's a very potentially important development, very encouraging.
So, Marius, there was a bunch of speculation in the lead up to this that this thing might have some very thorny issues that it wouldn't be able to agree upon, like, for example, whether the EFF would also be included in the agreement not to work with other political parties, and whether the DA would be willing to give up the position of president, because they're very likely to be the largest party in this coalition. So firstly, just your thoughts in general on it. But it seems like, at least on the surface, all of those kind of potential pitfalls and serious areas of disagreement have been ironed out. And I think this is what they're trying to do is quite difficult. They're going to have to perform very well in the election to actually make this work. But if you were going to make it work, this seems like the best way to start it. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, I think it's a good foundation. I don't think these parties together will get 50% of the votes in 2024. I mean, it's obviously not impossible, but it's highly improbable. I mean, as it stands, the DA plus Freedom Front plus and plus the IFP gives you maybe, I think they probably have collectively maybe 27 or 28% of the votes in Parliament at the moment. Obviously, as you say, the other parties, Spectrum National Party and UIM and so on, don't have parliamentary seats. In the 2024, I don't know if they will get. Action SA will definitely get into Parliament, but who knows how much of the vote they're going to get. As it stands, probably around about 5% would be my guess. So I think at the moment, this charted together, even in 2024, is probably going to be sitting with about maybe 35% collectively, 40% on the outside. So I think, this is more, I think, a framework to build an opposition coalition that can get to power in 2029. I think 2024 is too early. But that said, I think in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, this is where these parties do have a chance of power, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, with this coalition or this partnership between the DA and the IFP. And even in Gauteng, at the Gauteng DA Provincial Conference, I think it was last weekend, Helen Zille said that according to, or maybe it was John Steenhuisen, anyway, one of the two of them said, according to polling now in Gauteng, the moonshot parties, whatever you want to call it, together had 48% of the votes, according to this polling. Obviously, this is, just a snapshot. It's not a prediction, whatever. So even in Gauteng, these parties have a really good shot at power, and that's going to be the real dry run. We've seen that the opposition has taken some municipalities across South Africa from the ANC, and we've seen they've been, places they've been difficult to run, and there've been lots of problems. And they've also, Joburg and Ekurhuleni were run by the DA, and they were taken back by the ANC and Nelson Mandela Bay. So even once you get into power, it's very tricky and it's very hard. But overall, this is a good foundation. I like what they say, but the devil's in the detail. It's as a lot of these kinds of things, we want to do all these. We want more nice things and fewer bad things. That's great. That's what we all want. But how are we going to get there? And I think that's what as I say, that's the devil in the detail. And just with Dirk van Niekerk's comments, where he said, the patronage network is so deeply entrenched in all spheres that the incoming government will be paralyzed from day one. That might be true, but what should we do then? Throw our hands in the air and say, cool, we mustn't try get into government. It's going to be, we've seen what's happened in municipalities. It's very hard for opposition parties to run these municipalities. And we know from anecdotal evidence and from, actual news reports that there are ANC cadres or people who just, don't like the opposition parties who work to make government difficult when it's municipalities is being lost by the ANC and so on. We know this happens, but you've got to, there are ways of getting around this. And I think as people see that things can be run better by the opposition, then more votes start going to them. And we've seen what's happening in a couple of places. I think Cape Town's showing actually DA governance pretty well. Umgeni in KwaZulu-Natal, I think Chris Papas down there is doing a very good job. As I said, it gives me a lot of hope, but I think 2024 is going to be too soon for this opposition pact. I think 2029 is really when it's got a real chance, I think.
So, there are, I agree with you that, saying, we want to do good things and not do bad things. Obviously, there's quite a bit of that in the things I read out, but there are some things that we can say are a little bit more kind of specific and suggest a direction. Ending a catered appointment and including professionalizing the public service is, I think a real thing. Decentralizing power to the lowest effective level of government, that's very much an ideological change from the way things are currently run. An open market economy and a commitment to that is also a a sign that this is an ideologically distinct bloc from the ANC, because I think a lot of these things they say, when you kind of try to have these broad church consensus things, they end up just being a lot like, we're the ANC but not corrupt, and that never works. Never at all. I think it's quite interesting, so we don't really know what will happen in the national election, but it's a bit of a long shot that this thing is going to be able to beat both the ANC and the EFF. But as Marius says, Michael, this really is a framework, I think, for the provinces, and it suggests that especially the DA and the IFP are going to have, I think, a pretty good time working together if this thing holds. I am a little bit, they do say that they're going to have to put together this manifesto that everyone will contribute to. And that's obviously, I think, a good idea of how to manage the thing, but I can very easily see problems arising when they actually try to put that together. What do you make of the things Marius and I have said?
A difficult challenge, I think, as your last point, putting together what it is that they can all say, this is what we agree to or what we believe in. But I think what seems to be taking shape is the idea that one thing they do believe in is the virtue of working together to achieve a better result, a much better result on the basis of really quite simple things, quite effective things, being capable government, responsive and so on, and devolving power to institutions or the level of government where it actually can function most effectively. And I think in this, I'm sure Marius is right, and there's a great deal more about the political scene than I do. But even if there isn't this dramatic change that maybe a lot of people are foolishly hoping for in 2024, or optimistically hoping for, what we might well see between 24 and 29 is an increasing demonstration of the coalition's capacity on a smaller scale. And I think that could be a very powerful symbol, a very powerful example to voters who might be doubtful and skeptical. And I think it will also likely focus the minds of the participants in the coalition to really steel themselves, not to have stupid disagreements about petty things, but really to focus on making substantive changes that really do help people and make a change in the lives of ordinary people. And I think if we see that, we could see quite a significant momentum build after 2024. So, I mean, at the moment, obviously, we were focusing on everything leading up to 2024, but the potential is that what we could be looking at is the beginning of a momentum which could be very effective.
So, I think one thing, though, is that if there is going to be any shot at national government, this thing is going to have to be opened up to some new parties. I don't know which ones, but there's definitely going to have to be other parties included in here. Even if these two new parties that don't have any seats in Parliament get some seats, they're still probably going to need someone who shall we say is a little bit, someone who didn't want to attend this thing in the first place. So I think it's going to probably have to have room for some sort of expansion if it wants to take a shot at national government, or else not really go ahead. But I don't know, Marius, any final thoughts on this?
I think you're right about there can probably have to be other parties involved, but I'm sure we could have a thing where we have parties who are formally part of this coalition and sign it, and then parties that are kind of like just in the orbit, and they're like, we're not formally maybe be in a confidence and supply kind of deal, something like that, And I think we'll see parties like the ACDP join in time. Maybe even other parties maybe that are a bit more aligned to the ANCs, like the UDM and all that kind of thing. We might see the PA join, but who knows with them?
Who knows with them? I saw they said, "Oh, we're willing to join this thing," and ditch the ANC, and it's like, guys, you're in a coalition with the ANC currently. But I am a little bit surprised that the ACDP decided not to be involved in this, and I think that's probably going to hurt them in the long run.
They've been a pretty solid partner for anti-ANC parties since we started having coalition governments. They're one of the parties. They were part of the 2006 coalition in Cape Town with the DA and so on, and they've been solid with the DA and municipalities across South Africa. I mean, I know there's some councillors who voted for the ANC FF candidates in Joburg recently, but I think that was because they'd been bribed or something. So I don't know if we can take
Yeah,
them
they
as
got fired, I think, afterwards.
yeah, exactly. So the ACDP's been pretty solid, and generally they support they're against EWC. They're pretty much pro free market and all that kind of thing. They're a bit socially conservative compared to some of the other parties, I think, but overall you'd think they'd be solid in this anti-ANC coalition.
Yes. So anyway, we'll have to see what happens, and maybe they'll join at a later date. But I suspect there's some sort of detail there, and I'd prefer our political journalists to be looking at that rather than writing threads on Twitter about how there aren't enough women in the
Just one thing on the ACDP. One thing on the ACDP, I don't know if they did in the end, but when they announced who was going to be part of this convention, ACDP was going to attend as an observer, I believe. So was Bosa, Musi Maimani's outfit. But I don't know how much, if they had any input, or they just, listen to discussion, whatever the case was.
Yes. And also, Rise Mzansi should probably think about being in this thing as well, if they want to make. Although, who knows how well Bosa or Rise Mzansi are actually going to do when it comes time to it. But anyway, something to watch. We'll have to see whether this project actually makes a meaningful difference in South Africa. But I think that, as far as well as this thing could go, this is probably about as well as it could have gone, considering the difficulty of what they're trying to do. Okay, let's move on to our next one. And this one makes me want to absolutely tear my hair out and bash my head on the table and scream. I'm not going to do any of that. It's exciting as it will be. Transnet CEO fears major job losses in the trucking industry if the rail system improves. So as we've complained about many times on this show, the collapsing rail infrastructure has caused an enormous shift of cargo moving onto the roads, onto the big trucking enterprises, as the rail is no longer able to carry so much stuff. And this has got lots of negatives. Trucks are often involved in accidents, the roads get damaged, trucks are slow, so they make the roads slower and more difficult to drive on. Trucks are more expensive, so they cause a rise in prices of everything, and they make a loss. They cause a loss in profits for companies. They reduce tax uptake. But the concern here is that and this is a quote from I think the CEO of Transnet. We have created the demand. Our failure on one hand and the demand of the mining industry has created the trucking industry. For the vast majority of truckers, they are moms and pops who, when left to work, took their pensions and bought a truck because there was an opportunity. And, I think that's probably at least mostly true. If the rail system did come back, you probably would see, at least until the economy grew, a reduction in the trucking industry. But we could also smash every single cell phone in the country and then have the government hire people to deliver handwritten messages to whoever you want to send them. And you could do it. It would create a lot of jobs. It would be super expensive, completely unsustainable. It would rise the cost of doing business enormously, and it would wreck the whole economy.
But Nick, that's also a reason not to fix Eskom, because there's a big industry growing now of people buying inverters and solar panels and so on.
Think of the generator salesman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If we fix Eskom, then we're going to destroy that industry. It's terrible.
Yeah.
We can't do that.
Yes. In every economic situation, there are winners and losers who can make.
We must destroy all cars for the horse industry in South Africa.
Exactly. But overall, you want a more efficient economy because it reduces prices for everyone. It creates more opportunities. And if you had a proper functioning economy that could supply goods to people for cheap prices, people wouldn't have to cash out their pensions to become a truck driver, because they'd be able to get a solid, stable paying job that actually helped them, enter the middle class. This is such...
it's criminal, actually.
Michael, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying, it's really a criminal line of reasoning for all the reasons that you have set out. And we've had so much written in the past year alone, let alone the past decade, about the potential that we could unleash if we had decent rail mobility, both for goods and people, delivering stuff to harbors, connecting to the world, connecting to Africa. It's just astonishing that somebody who actually heads up this thing can come up with this cockeyed idea and talk about moms and pops. I mean, I think that's also terribly cynical, to kind of make this personal, touchy-feely, we care about these poor little people. It's shocking. She ought to be rapped very heavily on the knuckles, kicked on her shins, I think, rather than, it's just bad. Yeah.
Yeah, just economically illiterate is what it is.
Yeah.
Oh, it's same as during the COVID lockdowns when Takealot wasn't allowed to deliver anything because brick and mortar stores had to be closed down. It's not fair and all this stuff. Which, okay, cool, but now you're making it more difficult for ordinary people. It's the exact same thing. And I mean, there's not much to add. I think Michael and you have laid it out. It's completely silly. It's also kind of giving up responsibility. There's no reason we're not going to fix it because we care. Like Michael says, we care about these poor people who've had to cash out their pensions. They're the ones we're worried about. So.
Right, exactly. And the thing is, this is very much a case of, and you see it with Eskom too. Oh, we can't fire these Eskom workers because that's so important. They won't be able to find jobs in other things, that sort of stuff. But by protecting that group of people, you're actually making a much larger group of people suffer far more. And I like individualism. I like in prioritizing the individual, but sometimes when you're in government and you're making decisions for collective, you have to prioritize the many over the few. And this is a perfect example of that. The rail systems are prioritizing the many over the few.
I mean, anybody who's traveled in Mpumalanga, in the last few years, and recently, probably in the last 5 years, can just see the state. Not all the roads. Some of the roads in Mpumalanga are decent, but some of those, I was driving to Pilgrim's Rest once, and it was like driving on the surface of the moon, and you couldn't go faster than 10 k's an hour because of the state of the road. And this was a regional road. It wasn't like, some Pondoki road going to Guy's Farm. That was a main road between towns, and you couldn't drive faster than 10 k's an hour because you damaged your vehicle. But trucks would come flying that road at 50, 60 k's an hour because obviously you've got much bigger wheels and all that kind of thing. But a little car, but I mean, super dangerous, and I mean the roads are just it was quite something to see.
No, exactly. Anyway, this is the kind of situation we get into when this sort of zero-sum thinking dominates our economic discussions. We think, we're all just trying to balance the resources that are currently there rather than actually make our society wealthier. We have to do.
There's a belief that there's a finite power of resources. And you can't grow it. You can only divide what already exists. You can't make it any bigger. So I think that's exactly the zero something, as you said.
Yeah, and the other thing, of course, is it's crushingly patronizing. It's saying we've got to step in and interfere with people's lives because they can't possibly make decisions for themselves. They can't adjust to the changing society. The world is changing all the time.
It's even worse than that. It's not we have to interfere. We're not going to do the thing that we are paid to do, which is fix the damn railways.
Exactly. Oh no.
Utterly madness. Okay, there were a bunch of other stories that you guys sent me. I don't know if I have the willpower to talk about them after that one. Maybe let's just talk about this one very briefly for about 90 seconds. Bunch of South African journalists and NGO people being kicked out of Zimbabwe, and they've got an election coming up soon, which I think everyone is expecting to be filled with violence and cheating and mismanagement and all sorts of nasty stuff. The former SABC chief operating officer, Chris Moroleng, who works now with Good Governance Africa, was going to do research on stuff in Zimbabwe. After getting his documents all in order, they went to Zimbabwe. They were suddenly called to Office of Immigration Officials, asked what they were doing there. They explained their research objectives. They took them back to the hotel, and then they said, actually, no, you're getting kicked out of the country. Bye. At the same time, a Daily Maverick photographer who was going to photograph the election had his accreditation removed and is not going to be able to legally cover it. So, I mean, this is not unexpected at all, of course. But it's a grim sign of the way I think that this election is going to be conducted in Zimbabwe. That there is not, there was like I think a couple of news stories about how the police were allowing the opposition to have some rallies, which suggested that maybe the regime was slightly loosening its grip, but it looks very
but
grim.
people have been killed. So
exactly.
One issue of bring two the things that I love together: cricket and politics. One thing that really annoys me more than you can believe is it was announced that Zimbabwe is probably going to play a test match against England in England next year. It's the first time they're going to play each other in over 20 years in a test match. And the reason they haven't played each other for so long is because the British government told the English Cricket Board to have no relations with Zimbabwe their government's terrible. Mugabe's a horrible man. They don't allow free political activity. Things are probably nearly as bad as they've ever been in Zimbabwe in the past 25 years. And now it's fine. Now you guys can have sporting relations again. And just, there's no rhyme or reason to it. And it just shows you that nobody really cares about the ordinary people. Like, cool. Well, okay. Well, Mnangagwa is probably worse than Mugabe. And we've seen there's no free political activity in Zimbabwe. People are still getting murdered for not supporting the right party, but it's fine. Let's pretend that didn't happen. Let's go play a cricket match again.
Yes. No, very grim. And the world has just decided to just kind of live with it, which does not.
And also, our government also has to bear some responsibility for this, because if in 2008, I think, if we told Robert Mugabe you'd lost his election fair and square, it's not. I'm not saying he definitely would have stood down, but if South Africa hadn't supported him, there's a very good chance we would have seen the NDC come into government there, and things would have been very different in Zimbabwe today. But South Africa has some responsibility for what's happened in that country.
This is the point I always want to add to the immigration debate, is that we, as South Africans, the South African state rather, contributed to the destruction of Zimbabwe and the reason why so many of them feel the need to flee their country and come and work here. And a positive first step to actually reducing immigration to the country, if that's something you want to do, is help get Zimbabwe working again.
Exactly.
I think that's one that everyone could be happy with, except for ZANU-PF, of course. Michael, final thoughts before we close up for today.
I mean, tragic comment from Maruleng. He says, as we stand, we're disheartened and disappointed by this abrupt turn of events, but we cannot claim to be surprised. And this is the awful thing, isn't it? That none of us is really surprised that despite those early signs that maybe there was going to be a change, this is how it's going to be. I think that's one point. The other thing is, of course, this brings home to us that so long as we still have a functioning democratic system, that we are still so much more free and able to participate in politics, this is really the time for us to get involved and support every effort to change our own country.
Exactly, because who knows how long it'll last.
Just one final thing. I was just reminded that Chris Maruleng is of the famous "Don't Touch Me on My Studio" clip. So I wonder if you were saying
yes.
So the ZANU-PF goons were trying to throw him out of the country. So.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. And we will see you next week on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.